All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar series on robotics for rehabilitation and elderly care. My name is Vineet Vashisht. I'm assistant professor at IIT Gandhinagar. And today we are having our fourth webinar of this series on the topic design and control of hand and leg exoskeleton for neuro-rehabilitation of stroke patient. This webinar is being delivered by Professor Ashish Dutta. He's a professor of mechanical engineering at IIT Kanpur. Just a little housekeeping before we get started is whatever questions you may have in between, you can please write in the question and answer block. And we will keep on taking in between if Professor Dutta wants to take a break, or at the end, we will have enough time to go through most of your questions. And I think then without ado, let me just introduce a little bit about our speaker. I think many of us already know Professor Dutta from his work at he has been presenting at Robotics Society of India and various other recent webinar series. So, I mean, he has done his PhD from Akita University, Japan, and he has also worked at Bhabha Atomic Research Center on telemanipulator design and control for nuclear applications. At IIT Kanpur, he's working in the area of infrastructure and automation. I think his interest is in humanoid robotics, motion planning, intelligent control system, as well as in rehabilitation engineering. And that's the topic for today. He has a number of publications and various awards. Among the couple of things that I would like to highlight is he's a member of ISRO Chandrayaan-2 lunar mission. He was, and then he's also a member of Bureau of Indian Standard and Task Force of AI and of the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. And currently he's being the organizing chair of Advances in Robotics, our national conference in the robotics in India. So with this, I will give the platform to Professor Dutta to share some of his work with us.
Okay, thank you, Vineet, for the invitation and also the kind introduction. So I'll just cut the video to conserve the bandwidth. Okay.
Yeah.
So okay, so let's get started. So today I'll be talking to you on design and control of hand and leg exoskeletons, and I'm speaking mainly to students, researchers, maybe faculty members. So I'll try and focus on the research issues which are there and which have not been solved, and some of them which have been solved in to a very small extent. Okay, so I will try and focus on mechanical design issues and control issues, and very specific topics of things like BCI. I'll just go through very quickly. Probably there would be another speaker sometime in future. I think Vineet is speaking to Professor Girijesh Prasad. So exoskeletons are essentially for augmenting human capabilities, and as you can see in the picture, on the right side, you have application in the defense forces where they are augmenting the load carrying capacity of soldiers. So they can be lower limb exoskeleton, they can be arm exoskeleton, it can be hip exoskeleton, finger exoskeleton, all kinds of exoskeletons. And this business of exoskeletons can be divided into three subsystems. One is a robot. So the exoskeleton is the mechanical structure or the mechanism, as is shown here in this figure here. So that is the robot actually, or the mechanism. So that's one part. So this is part one. Part two is the human who is there. Okay, so the person who is wearing it is the part two of the subsystem. And part three of the subsystem is the control system, which is interacting between these two systems now. Okay, so effectively there are three subsystems in this whole story: the robot, the human, and cooperative control. And because it's a robot and a human, there is this transfer of information in the sense of force information, position information, okay, torque information. Now, so there are a lot of challenges in this topic of exoskeletons. The first is, of course, design. Okay, how do you design a robot? Now, this robot design is not essentially a robot design because the human joints and the joint structures, the motion mechanism is very different from that of a robot. Second is cooperative control, because a human control system and a robot control system are different. Okay. Then the third is human assistance. So the robot is actually assisting the human. Now, what do you mean by that? What is the metric of your saying, is the robot assisting the human or the human is assisting the robot? How do you know? Okay, so there are these three challenges which are there, and most of this are still open questions. Okay, most of this has still not been solved in the past 30 years, irrespective of who says what and whatever you hear. Okay, so let's start off. So the first thing that we'll need to know is that there is something called admittance and there is something called impedance. Now, admittance in the real world is essentially a control system in which the input is force, okay, as written here, and the output is position. Okay, so you have force is equal to mass into acceleration. Okay, where your input, what is your input here? You're giving a force, okay, and the body is moving with some acceleration. The output is the acceleration. That is admittance. Now, when we say impedance, in impedance, the input is position or acceleration, and the output is force. So it's the reverse of this. Okay, so these are two different things. One is in the physical world, the other is in the biological world. Okay. Now, if you see a human and a robot, so there is a human who is pushing and pulling an object, and there is a robot on the other side, on the right-hand side here. The transfer of information between the robot and the human is by means of sensors. What kinds of sensors? The human fingertip has all kinds of sensors: force, torque, slip, vibration, temperature, pressure. Okay, but the poor robot doesn't have all those sensors. At most, it may have a position sensor or it may have a force sensor. That's it. Okay, so the first point that comes up is the interaction between these two. How are they interacting? By means of transfer of information. What kind of information? Force, torque, force, position, okay, slip, shear force, all that. Now, the first challenge is there. How do you develop sensors which can get the information? What is the intent of the human who is pushing or pulling an object, and then trying to, and the robot has to perceive that and react accordingly. So that's the first challenge, sensors. Now, you'll be surprised to know that the human fingertip has about 8 or 9 different kind of sensors, whereas the poor robot has only one. It can only measure, it can measure normal force, nothing else. Okay. So when we are gripping an object or we are feeling pressure on our fingertips, we exactly know which direction it is coming from. Okay, but a robot has no way of doing that. So the first challenge is sensors, and there is not much change that has taken place in the last maybe 2 or 3 decades. Okay, so sensors is one. Number two is when the human is pushing it, okay, is applying a force, the robot has to sense that force and then behave accordingly. Now, the control system in the robot is actually a PD controller, which is basically a position controller. Okay, so basically what is a position controller? It determines an error, so it creates an error E desired minus E present, generates an error, and then puts a KP and a KD on that error E, and then controls in the position domain. Whereas for the human being is basically an impedance controller. Okay, so there is a mismatch here now. Now, what kind of mismatch? For example, if I apply a particular force, the human is applying a force F. Now, this force is equal to mass into acceleration. Suppose I want to find X, I need to find X. Why? Because it is ultimately a position controller, PD controller, it needs X. So I will integrate this equation and get X. Okay, and then the robot will move for a particular X. Whereas for the human is not integrating this equation, but the human is using the impedance control equation, which is the other one. Force is mass into acceleration, mx double dot plus px dot plus kx plus c. So the human is going to integrate this equation and get an x. Now this x, let's call it x dashed. So this x dashed, which is got from this equation, and this x, which is got from Newton's law here, they are different now. Okay, so your first mismatch comes in a robot and a human coming into picture. That the robot is moving in a different way and the human is moving in a different way now. Why? Because our control structures are different. Okay, so please think about it a little bit. Human beings are force controllers. We are not position controllers. If somebody were to ask you, if you're pointing in a particular direction and somebody asks you what is the coordinate of your fingertip, okay, immediately the position of your fingertip with respect to which axis, where is your zero? Okay, we don't have position sensors. So this whole business of position control is not there in a human. We are basically force controllers when we are walking, when we are moving, when we are picking up an object, etc. Whereas for a robot, it is essentially a position controller. So there is a mismatch here now. So when you're making a robot and a human cooperate, you must have a control structure which is going to be same for both. So that's the second challenge. The third challenge is, of course, the mechanical design of the structure itself. Okay, so we have challenges in sensors, control structure, mechanical design. Now, and of course, behavior. Now, when we say a human being is going to behave in a particular way, what do you mean about what is the meaning of that? So look at this example that this is a hard environment. Let's say this is a wall, and the human is pushing against the wall. Okay. Now, when you're pushing against the wall in this direction, and maybe you're trying to move in this direction towards the green arrow. Okay. Now, your arm has to behave in a particular way. For example, if you're pushing against the hard wall, you must have soft motion control. Okay, or the stiffness uh, should be low. Why? You can imagine if your hand is very rigid and you're pushing against a rigid wall, there is going to be impact forces, and which is going to damage either of them. Whereas if you're moving in this direction, which is free space, now you can move in a very stiff way. Your hand can have higher stiffness because it's not hitting anything. Okay, so this whole business comes about because there is a force reaction coming from that side, and in free space there is no force. Okay, so in one way, in one case, you have to behave like you have very, your hand has to behave like a soft spring, and in another case it has to behave like a hard spring. Okay, so you also have to have this adaptive behavior between a robot and a human. Okay, so sensors, then your design, then your control structure, then your behavior now is coming into picture. So when you're interacting with the hard environment, it depends on which direction you're moving, what you're trying to do. Based on that, you have to keep switching your behavior. Now, how is this done? What is the meaning of this behavior? For example, we talk about the stiffness. Now, you know the stiffness of a spring is forces F is equal to K into del X. Okay, and K is your stiffness. So this example actually shows us physically what it means. Suppose you're pushing against this lever. This is a very hard spring. Okay, and if it is a low spring, you can push very easily. Now there is another term which is called a spring rate. Okay, that means you're pushing and it's following that motion. This is a low spring rate. Impact forces, this is hitting against a very high spring. This is one hitting against a low spring. Okay, now this video, of course taken from YouTube, is a very good example of physically what do you mean by stiffness. Okay, that you have to be stiff in a particular way, in a particular direction, and you have to be soft in another way. In case of a robot, let's see further. This is the KUKA robot. So if the hand is very stiff or very not very stiff, basically it is going to affect the motion. So this is a case where it is pretty stiff. Okay, you can see that the system is vibrating. Okay, he's pushing it and he's leaving it, and the robot arm is vibrating because of the K value basically there, which has been the stiffness controller which has been put. Here it's a very stiff spring. Okay, so he's pushing and he's hardly moving. Why? The spring is very, very hard. Okay, this is another example where the person is lifting the arm and the arm is coming down immediately. Okay, this is again stiffness control with a particular stiffness value. Okay, now this is another example where he pushes the arm and the arm stays there. This is only by playing with the stiffness values. Okay, now this gives us this is an example where he's pushing and it's actually hitting back. Okay, so this is basically to show you what is the meaning, physical meaning of this word stiffness and behavior, and for a robot, what is it that you want. Now, in this case of the robot that you saw, the robot and the human were not attached to one another like in an exoskeleton. In an exoskeleton is even more tricky. Why? Because if it starts pushing the human, then you know what will happen. It'll break your legs or it'll break your hands. Okay, so in this robot, the robot was separate, human was separate. So although it was behaving in some ways which are not very safe, it was still okay because the robot was separate. But in the case of an exoskeleton which is tightly attached to your legs or your arms, then you have a problem. Okay, so this is what I mean by behavior, and it has to behave in a particular way. This is a challenge. It has still not been solved. What is the main problem? The problem is that the human is a force controller, whereas the robot is a position controller. You could see very clearly how is it different. Now, how do we get out of this problem? One is by cheating. Now, what do I mean by cheating is I try to control the force by using a position controller. Okay, so the first is a motion controller, which is a standard PD or a PID controller. Okay, so it behaves like a position controller only, but you're trying to control force. The second is a force controller, where you're actually controlling force. The third is hybrid control, where there is force control and there is position control, force control or position control. And the third is impedance control, which is basically giving us a relation between force and position. Okay, so in the exoskeletons we basically worked on impedance control, where we are trying to look at the relation between the force and the position. Okay, these are some examples of how it is done. For example, if you want to control the force in a system, okay, then you can write the dynamic equation tau is equal to m into q double dot. Okay, then propose a position controller like this. Now this is a PD controller, this is a position controller, but you're controlling force. Okay, so put this in this equation. Okay, and what you get is a position controller, basically something like a PD controller, and then you're essentially controlling the position, but the effect is you're controlling the forces. So this is what I mean by cheating. You're trying to control force by controlling position. You're trying to control force by controlling the position of the system. Okay, this is one way. Now this is done, for example, in this robot grinding task. Okay, now this is on the right side. This is a robot which is writing on the surface. So there is the robot end effector here, and the robot has a pen and it's supposed to write like this on this curved surface. Okay, so the robot is actually in a position control mode, but is trying to control the fingertip force there, or the force at the tip of the pen. Okay, so this is being done in PD control mode, and this is a kind of cheating. Okay, now this is okay for a robot, but the moment you come to an exoskeleton, this will become dangerous to do. Now, what is the rationale? As I just showed in a video some time back, to avoid large forces, you can make it very soft. Okay, so to avoid impacts, you can play with the stiffness. Okay, so by making the stiffness high or by making the stiffness low. Okay, now the major part of my talk is on exoskeletons today, and our work was focused on developing exoskeletons for stroke rehabilitation, finger exoskeletons. And the hypothesis behind this is that when you do physiotherapy, for example, as shown in this figure here, when a person has a stroke, it essentially means that a part of the brain is damaged, okay, because of blood clot or leakage of blood, and the neurons in that part of the body do not work, in the part of the brain. And because of that malfunction in the brain, the other part of the body is damaged. So basically, it means that if you are having a problem in the brain here, then the other side of the body, because the connections are crossed, you'll have a problem in your arms or your legs or in speech or something. Okay. Now, how is physiotherapy done? It is basically done like this, where there is a physiotherapist and the person will hold your hands and close it and open it. And that is how physical therapy is done. And basically, this will enhance some kind of recovery in the brain by means of the neurons will regenerate, and there'll be some reorganization of the neurons. But it happens only for about 6 months. That means if you recover by 6 months, it's great. If you don't recover by 6 months, that's the end of story. Nothing more is going to happen. Okay. Now, the hypothesis that we are making here is that to enable better connection between the brain and the hand, we should make the connection between the brain and the hand when the person is doing the exercise. What we mean is that you can see here that we have the hands here. So from the fingers, then it's the arm, it goes to the spinal column, from there it goes to the brain. So there is a connection there. So when the person is doing the exercise, the physiotherapy, the person could be thinking of something else, may not be thinking of the task at all. So there is no connection between the brain and the hand. Okay, so if you can force the person to have a connection when the person is moving his or her hands or fingers, if you could force the person to think about it, then this recovery is going to be faster. Why? Because now there is a connection between the brain and the hand also. So that's the hypothesis that we work on. Okay, so we're trying to make the connection between the brain and the hand when you're doing the exercise. And how do we do that? We do this by means of a BCI. Okay, so this is a study which was done a long time ago, in 11 or 12 years ago, in University of Ulster, where they did physiotherapy first, okay, separately here. So the person does physiotherapy with the physiotherapist, and then for about 30 minutes, then after 30 minutes, the person plays a video game. So using a BCI cap, you can see here that this is a game. So there is a red basket and there is a green basket. The person has to think there's a green ball there. So simply by thinking, you're supposed to move the ball towards the green basket. Okay, so 30 minutes of this and 30 minutes of this. Okay, but they are not connected. One is after the other one. And what they found is that essentially, statistically, it was found that the persons who did both of this, they seem to recover their grip strength. Okay, but this was about 12, 13 years ago. but it is some indicator that maybe this helps. So this is where we started off by saying that we'll develop an exoskeleton which is going to make your fingers move, and you have to focus on the exoskeleton by means of a BCI. So what is the basic paradigm here? So the person puts on a BCI cap and the person is shown a cue, for example, an open hand or a closed hand, and the person has to think and do accordingly. If the person thinks correctly, only then the exoskeleton will actuate, not otherwise. So this ensures the person is not fooling also. So in the design of an exoskeleton for the fingers is something like this. So essentially, we have a mechanical structure on the fingers, which is actuated either by EMG, EEG, or by taking signals from the other hand, which is not impaired. So in this case, we have put markers, and using a vision camera, when the person moves the good hand, the impaired hand also functions. Okay, but we want the person to focus, and hence the question of BCI. So first, I'll talk about mechanical design of such systems, and then we'll go on to the controller part. Okay. So an exoskeleton for the finger is essentially a robotic device which is worn like this on the fingers. Okay, and then it is actually connected to the BCI, and then we actuate it. So this provides focus, and also this provides your physiotherapy, both of them. Now, if you look at the human joints, the human finger joints are not revolute joints. So in the case of the leg, in the case of the hands, the arms, the shoulders, elbow, anybody who's working with exoskeleton has to know this, that your joints are not revolute joints, which means that there is a varying axis of rotation. Okay, what I mean is in terms of a mechanism, there is an instantaneous center of rotation keeps changing. So if you have a revolute joint, then this joint radius will remain constant. Okay, whereas in this particular case, that R will start changing. Okay, because the axis changes. So if you put a revolute joint there in a robot, what will happen is there will be a mismatch in the motion now. So what is going to happen is either the exoskeleton will be damaged or your fingers will be damaged. Either will go. Okay, and this is one of the biggest challenges in exoskeleton design today. One of the reasons also why exoskeletons have not been commercially available. Okay, because you cannot medically prove that it will not damage your arms. Okay, and unless you can do that, the medical council will not approve your device. This is challenge number one. So what we try to do is we try to look at, we are very specific in case of, we are just looking at these two motions. One is translation motion and the other is rotation motion. Why translation rotation? Because any 3D motion can be broken up into translations and rotations. So we look at a coin being translated and rotated, okay, and then we put markers and then we track the finger positions. Okay, so we know exactly how the finger was moving, finger joints were moving to translate the coin and then to rotate the coin. And we record this trajectory, we do trajectory fitting and all that, and get all the data out. Okay, then what we do is we are trying to design an exoskeleton for the thumb finger, index finger, middle finger. We see that the middle finger has 3 joints which are planar. It actually has 4, so we are neglecting this one. So we are just taking the 3 joints which are moving in the on the plane, and we are trying to replicate its motion. So if you want to replicate the motion of every joint, we cannot put a revolute joint in there. Okay, so what I mean is I cannot have a robot like this, put a revolute joint here, have another robot link like that, put another link like this. These are revolute joints, so this will not work. Okay, because the axis is changing now. Okay, so for every joint, I need to design a mechanism. What type of mechanism? So it can be a 4-bar, 5-bar spherical mechanism. Okay, so the simplest is a 4-bar. So we try to replicate the motion of every joint on the finger by means of a 4-bar mechanism. So each of this is showing you one 4-bar here. There's another one there, another one there, and they're coupled to each other. Okay, so this is a coupled 4-bar mechanism. Now, design of a 4-bar mechanism, we need to design this mechanism to be very small. So basically what we're trying to do, it should be able to follow the trajectory of the tip. Okay, that's what it should be able to do. So what we do is we try and track these trajectories. This is one, this is another one, that's another one, which we got from our recorded data. And these 4 bars, 1, 2, and 3, have to replicate that motion. And you can design this 4-bar by using this 4-bar mechanism. You're familiar with 4 bars, okay? So basically, this is a crank rocker mechanism. Okay, so there is a crank and there's a rocker at the other end. So there's a fixed link and there are 3 links which are rotating. So this is a 4-bar mechanism. Now we can synthesize a 4-bar mechanism like this. So what we are trying to do is to get this trajectory, you can get different mechanisms. So we want to choose the smallest mechanism. okay, because we don't want this to be very bulky. So what we are doing is we are fitting one of this. For example, I fit this and I vary this position O2 by using some kind of optimization or GA. And I'm going to vary my link length. Okay, so this is my link length. So I fix this position O4, I vary O2, and then for different link lengths, I see which mechanism will give me a trajectory which is closest to that. That's what we do. And what we basically do is uh, we write this our closed loop equation. So it's a 3-point synthesis. So if this is my point I'm tracking, there's 1 point here, 1 point in the middle, and 1 point at the end. So I basically construct my diodes like this. Okay, write my closed loop equations, one here and one for this one, sorry, one for this one and one for the other one. And we have two equations, two set of equations like this. And then we solve them by putting different values of link lengths and position O2. Okay, so basically what GA is doing here is it is taking that O2 position, putting different positions of O2, and then it is varying the link lengths and then seeing which one trajectory is the closest to this. Now, when you say trajectory is closest to this, how do you compare two trajectories? Okay, so we have one trajectory like this and we have another trajectory, say like this. Okay, so these are two trajectories. How do you compare them now? Okay, so one way is by looking at the Fourier coefficients of these two curves and then trying to see which one is the closest, find the diff. So what we try to do is to look at the Fourier coefficients and then look at the errors between the two curves. And that's our cost function or objective function. And we have some constraints. That means there is a bounding area. So this mechanism should not go outside that. Plus, 4-bar mechanisms have linkage defects. So they should not have crossovers and they should not have linkage defects. Okay, they should not have singularities. That we check as constraints. So after doing that, what we get is this mechanism, optimal mechanism. This is for the index finger. So you can see there is one 4-bar here. It's another 4-bar there, another 4-bar there. And this is for the middle finger. Okay, and this is for the thumb. So the thumb has also 3 degrees of freedom. So there is a total of 9 degrees of freedom, index, middle, and thumb. And after making this, we basically develop the device. So this is 9 degrees of freedom, okay, for rehabilitation. But then we found that when the stroke patient wears this, he finds it very difficult. In fact, a normal person also finds it very difficult because it's very bulky and the motion is not very nice. So we have to simplify it. So what we did is instead of putting it on the top of the finger, we moved it to the side of the finger. Okay, the mechanisms is the same 4-bar only. Procedure is exactly the same. And then what we did is it becomes smaller. So this mechanism became smaller mechanism. Now it can be worn. It's on the side of the fingers and it could be worn. Okay. Now this is a little better, but then a stroke patient would find it this difficult also. Why? Because a stroke patient does not actually have 9 degrees of freedom on the fingers. They normally have just open, close, that's about it. So to simplify it, we simplified this further. And what we did is instead of putting 3 4-bars on on each finger, we put only one 4-bar. So there is one 4-bar here on the base. And the coupler of this 4-bar can track the fingertip trajectory. And we found this is enough just for opening, closing for a stroke patient. So this has only 4 degrees of freedom. This has 4 DOF system. And there are 2 4-bars mechanisms which are active and there are 2 passive in front. So this is what the system looks like. Okay. So there is one 4-bar here. There's another 4-bar there, which are active. And there is one passive joint here, prismatic, revolute joint. There is one joint here, which is also passive. So it's in total 4 degrees of freedom. So the person puts his hand inside here and it can make you open and close. And for safety, I just talked about the stiffness. We had to do shape optimization. Okay. So shape optimization basically looks at the strain energy of the system when it is bending, because if you press too much, the finger can break. So if you're pressing too much, this linkage should actually bend. So it should bend like that. So it must have a particular kind of stiffness. And that we did by doing shape optimization and then doing FEM to see how much deflections are actually there. That's one. The second is you need the stiffness for safety and for force control. Because if the system is too rigid, you'll not be able to control forces and it is not safe. So the logic being, if the force is too much, the mechanism should break, the finger should not break. You have to ensure that before you can go to clinical trials. So this is done by using shape optimization, etc. And this is what we developed as the simplified one. It has only 4 degrees of freedom. And this is what the experiment looks like. So the person wears it on the fingers. Okay, it has 4 degrees of freedom. It is connected to a BCI. And there is a cue which is shown. And based on that, the person is, if the person is thinking correctly, it closes. and closes or opens or does nothing. I'll just come to that in a minute. So this is how it works. Okay. So now to focus, how do you get the patient to focus? Now, one way is you take the brain signals from the brain, okay, and do all kinds of feature extraction and all that, and see if the person is thinking correctly. If the person is thinking correctly, then only you actuate the exoskeleton. For that, we are using a BCI. Now, we are doing a finger exoskeleton, so we know exactly in the brain where the fingers are. So we know that the hand and the arm is controlling the motor cortex in that area. So I need to put my electrode in that area. Okay, one for the left and one for the right. And then I know if the person is thinking correctly or not. Okay, now this is easier said than done, because this is just for information that a lot of BCI gaming stuff is also there now, but they are very, very simple. Okay, for example, driving a car, shooting, but we haven't got very far. Now, what are we looking at in terms of the signals? Now we are basically looking at the mu waves, which is at 8 hertz to 13 hertz, and we are looking at the beta waves, 15 hertz to 30 hertz. Why these two? Because these two are the ones that are associated with motion. Okay, there are a lot of others. There is theta, alpha, there is gamma, and we're not interested in the other ones. So the first thing is you need to take out these two frequencies, analyze them, and see if the person is thinking correctly. Okay. Now, if the person is thinking correctly, what happens is there is a desynchronization of this of the neuronal activity. So how the brain functions is all these waves, all the neurons will be firing simultaneously. Okay. So if you're just looking at the EEG, you'll be getting signals which are coming uh, something like this. Okay, you'll get all kinds of signals which are happening. Now, the moment the person starts thinking, okay, there will be desynchronization of a particular signal. What I mean, the neurons will start, which are in sync, which are firing continuously. If the person is thinking correctly with the right arm, then the left side, that signal, the corresponding signals will start coming down. That means the neurons will go out of sync. Okay, and that is what is called desynchronization. Okay, so what we are looking for is you'll suddenly see a desynchronization of your neural signals, and that is an indication that the person is thinking correctly. Okay, so what we're looking for is this desynchronization of this band, mu band, and the beta band signals, okay, by putting a BCI cap. So this is what the paradigm looks like. The person puts on a BCI cap, and a cue is shown. Okay, so this is your paradigm for each trial. So there is a sound. Okay, so there is a beep sound. Okay, which says get ready. Now you should note the time scale. So this is 0 time seconds. So 1 2 seconds there is a beep sound which says get ready. Then the cue is shown. The cue is a visual cue which is shown here. The hand is closed or the hand is open, or it's do nothing, and it's randomly changed so that you can't bluff. Otherwise, the person will just, if it's open close, the person will go to sleep after some time. Okay, so in order to get the person's attention, this is randomly switched. And then if the person is thinking correctly, we get the BCI, the EEG signal, we get the EMG signal. And if the person is thinking correctly, then we actuate the exoskeleton. Okay, this is the paradigm for the trials. Okay, so we do 30% of physical practice, and then we do 15 minutes of BCI-based calibration and 30 minutes of BCI-based practice. This is what is our paradigm. The whole objective, make the person think, okay, when the person is doing the exercise. Now, now here in terms of the BCI part is we basically looked at the EEG, so the electromyogram and the EMG signal from the hands. Now with EEG, you can get only an accuracy of about 70%, okay, which is not enough to drive the exoskeleton. 70% means that only 70% of the time it is correct, 30% of the time it is wrong, okay, which doesn't help much. Now, if you couple EMG and EEG, then what we found is we could go up to 96 or 97% accuracy, which is good enough for driving a robot now. Okay, so this is something new which we tried to look at. Till now, what people were doing, they were looking at corticomuscular coupling. But what we tried to suggest is we looked at the band power correlation. What do I mean by that is we put 3 electrodes like this in the motor cortex, okay, and we look at the frequencies. So this is basically giving us the corticomuscular coupling, which is looking only at the frequency bands, okay, and with this we were not getting very high. So this is the conventional way where people were doing it. So what we suggested is that instead of doing corticomuscular coupling, if you look at the band power of the signal and consider the band power also, then what you'll be getting is much higher accuracy. So in terms of the signal processing itself, so this was something new, looking at the corticomuscular coupling. Now, what we mean by the coupling, you can look at the, so this is the frequency of a person, okay? And you can look at the blue line, which is at rest, and the red line is hand execution, okay? So this is showing that you can actually distinguish between both of them, the rest state and the hand execution state. You can distinguish. So if you can train some kind of machine learning algorithm which can figure this out, that whenever we're looking at this, it should be able to tell whether the person is thinking or not thinking, okay? So only BCI with CMC, which is traditionally what people were doing, were getting only about 65%. With corticomuscular coupling, with band power correlation here, we were getting up to 96%. Now, if you look at the two signals here, which is interesting, look at the paradigm on top, okay? There is a beep sound at 2 seconds. On the left-hand side is your EEG signal on the brain. EMG signal is from the muscle in the hand, which is shown there. So if you look at the time sequence at 2 seconds, as marked here, okay, the person gets ready and a cue is shown. Now, the moment the cue is shown, you can see that the signal is dropping. This is a desynchronization of the EEG signal that's happening, okay? And at 4 seconds, 2 to 4 seconds, it has dropped. And at this point of time, the person has actually been thinking correctly, that you can figure out. Now, if you look at the EMG on the other side, as the person thinks, it goes down from the spinal cord and then it goes to the hand. You can see more in terms of time. That takes a bit of time. So the EMG comes around 5 seconds. When the actual execution, the person is actually trying to move the hand. That's when the EMG comes, and that's about 5 seconds or 6 seconds delayed. But this is actually showing the correlation between EEG and EMG, and we are using both of this in terms of the band power correlation. And this actually, we were able to show that your accuracy here is, it can be pretty high. Okay, it can be as high as, so we have got 95% accuracy, okay, band power correlation, whereas only doing cortical muscular coupling will get you, for the same one, it's about 75% only, okay? So this is one major thing that we found. I will not go more into details of this. This is again easier said than done because these signals are non-stationary signals. They keep changing very fast, okay? So what happens is there is something called a shift detector, and you have to keep detecting when your signal has changed. Why? Because you're training something like a support vector machine, okay, a machine learning algorithm, which is telling you that, okay, the person is thinking or not thinking. But the training itself, if the signal shift, then what will happen? You have to retrain your classifier, okay? So you have to keep checking for the shift detection. And we also had a shift detector, which is going to detect for shifts, okay? And based on the CSD, that is the shift detector, it will have to retrain your classifier, okay? So I won't get into the details of this, but this is just to give you a flavor that it's very easy to say that you detect the signal and you do this and you, because there's a lot of people saying you can control a robot using BCI and all that, but actually we are still in the very incipient stages. Next, let's move on to more the second part of the problem. You have a robot and you have a human. Both of them are in physical contact now, okay? Both are interacting with one another. What should be the control structure? As I said, that one way of getting about this problem is by looking at impedance control. And the impedance control structure is something like given here, okay? So in this particular case, there is a robot and a human. We have to first decide who is leader and who is follower. Both of them can't be leaders, okay? It will not work. So in this case, the leader is the human and the follower is the robot. So the human being pushes it, okay, with some force F. This force is measured in the fingertips by a sensor. And based on this sensor, by using this impedance equation, we integrate this twice and we get X. And this X is given to the PD controller of the robot, and the robot operates in position control mode. Okay, so the human is in force control mode, the robot is in position control mode, and these two are being correlated by means of an impedance control law, which is written like this. Okay, we are using only M X double dot plus CX. There is no plus KX is not there, because if what we found is if there is a KX, this will start oscillating like a spring now. Okay, because the spring takes energy and gives it back. So the system will start oscillating. So this KX is not considered here. Okay, so this is what I mean by an impedance control system, which is a major challenge in any robot-human interaction kind of application. Now, how did we design the system? Essentially, we looked at a task done by two humans. Okay, so there is one human on one side and there is another human on the other side. So you put force sensors on an object like this. There's a force sensor there. So the two persons are pushing or pulling. This is in 1D. Okay, this is in 1D, means it's straight line motion only, not in 3D. Okay, so for moving it in 1D, we basically measure the force and the positions. So you measure the force and the position profiles, and then you fit your MNC parameters. Okay, now you can see that MNC are not variables, they change. Why? Because from starting point, your M is low, and when you're stopping, your M is high. That's, I mean, understandable from physics, right? And in terms of C also, this is the way it changes. So you have to switch your MNC parameters depending on where you are in your task space. This is 1D in one dimension only, so it's doable. The moment you come to 3D, there is big trouble. So our impedance control law is something like this. We measure the force in the fingertip, integrate this equation twice, get X, and then go to position control mode and control it. So the exoskeleton fingertip essentially has force sensors which are put on the fingertip there in that cover. So first the person is attempting. So you can see on the left side, these are force sensors, pressure sensors basically. So when the person is trying to close, okay, you'll measure the force, get integrate that equation twice, get X, and then move in position control mode. Okay. Now, the question of variation of M and K comes in. That depends on where you are in that space, operating space. You can switch your M and K. That's okay. Okay. But the challenge comes here. Okay. Now, this has to be assist as needed. That means if a person is able to do, let the person do the exercise. If the person is not able to do, then only you assist. Otherwise, what will happen is the person will come and sit like a physiotherapist and relax. His hands will be opened and closed, and the person will be doing nothing, because that doesn't help. Okay. So it has to be assist as needed mode. So in assist as needed mode, the stroke patient may not be able to apply that much force. Okay. So if the person can apply less force, what you do is you make your MNC parameters lower so that the person can still move with a lesser force. So this graph here basically shows that if this is the force applied by a healthy subject, if a stroke patient cannot apply that force, you reduce the MNC parameters so that the person can move with a lower force now. Okay. But if you always do that, there is no challenge in that. Okay. The person will apply the minimum amount of force and it will keep moving and he'll be very happy and nothing is going to happen again. So what you do is you need to make it more and more difficult as time goes by. So you have to update your challenge level. So after the first few days, what you do is you have to change that M and K, essentially make it higher, put larger values of M and K so that it makes the task more difficult. So in the second video I showed today, or the first video, I showed that there's something called stiffness and stiffness rate. Okay, so by playing with the stiffness, you can make the task harder or you can make it easier. Okay, and that is exactly what we are doing here. Okay, so this is providing assist as needed. It is also providing a challenge to the person, that if a person is able to move, then you start making it harder. So he tries harder and harder. Okay, and this should theoretically become close to a healthy person now. Okay, this is the way we design a cooperative controller, where you can switch the difficulty level. You can also switch between a behavior of the robot and the human, which is very important here. So these are some trials which we carried out at Regency Hospital in Kanpur, and also the same trials were carried out in the UK as part of the UKERI project. So the trial is something like this. The person sees on the computer screen, okay, and a hand is open or the hand is closed. Now the person has to think accurately, and only if the person thinks correctly, only then the exoskeleton actuates. Okay, so this gives an idea of the trial, of how the trial proceeds and how the person is being forced now to think. Okay, because if the person is not thinking, the exoskeleton will not actuate at all. Then you know nothing is happening. And this is the results of the trial, which were carried out for almost 3 to 4 months. Okay, so we had about 10 stroke patients, but this has to go on for about 4 months. So about halfway through, almost 6 of them ran away, because most of the stroke patients feel that nothing is going to happen. And these trials are for patients who have already saturated, which means at least more than 6 months of physiotherapy they already had. Okay, 1 year to 6 months. That means they are not improving with physiotherapy from the physiotherapist. Only those patients we took. Okay, so At the end, we were left with 4 patients here in India. And what we find is the classification accuracy here. Now, this actually shows that if the classification accuracy is higher, it means your neurons are firing much more in sync. Okay, that means there is either regeneration or there is reorganization. The second is the grip strength. Grip strength is how much force the person can apply in the fingertip. So at the start of the experiment, you can see the person could apply 2 kg only. And at the end of the experiment, the person could apply 16 kg. Okay, this is another indicator that recovery has taken place. Because in a stroke patient, there is nothing wrong with the hands. It is basically the brain which is gone. Okay, so this actually showed that even for patients who had saturated after 6 months, they got 100% recovery. Now, in the UK also, we got same results that they got 100% recovery. Okay, so this is actually proving that if you force a person to think during the exercise, the person will be, that recovery is possible in 100% cases. Very interesting cases. This was done a couple of years back, I think three years back. And we did speak to the people after about a year or 2 years. Okay, and it was interesting to note that out of the 4%, 3% have already forgotten, means they have lost their recovery. So this business of learning also has something called forgetting. Okay, that is something nobody has looked at in the world. There's no literature on that. That if you recover like this, how long is it going to last? Okay, which means you have to keep on doing this with some in some periods. How much, nobody knows. Okay, so these are all open-ended stuff where we can do a lot of research and find new results. The second thing which is not answering is, with an EMG, you can only look, it's a surface electrode. So you can look at the surface signal, not inside the brain. Okay, so what actually happened inside? Did new neurons grow? Was there regeneration or something else happened? How do you know? Okay, so for doing that, we looked at further studies. So this is also a study for showing that recovery did take place, and you can see that the area, the signal area has increased, which means that there is some amount of regeneration of your neurons in the brain. Okay, but is this all, or something more has happened? To study that, we also looked at the MEG signals. Okay, now MEG is magnetoencephalography. Now this is something like our MRI, or this is similar to MRI or CT scan. Okay, where you can get signals which are much deeper inside the brain. Now EEG looks at electrical signals when a neuron fires, but MEG looks at magnetic signals. So when a neuron fires, it produces a very small voltage which creates a magnetic field. Now this picks up that magnetic field, and it's a very big machine, very expensive machine. I think in India there are only 2, one in Bangalore and one in Gurgaon. UK, they have quite a lot of them. And the person has to sit inside the machine like this, as shown in the figure. And this has a large number of electrodes. I think it has 364 electrodes, and it can see right inside your brain. Okay, now by looking at this signals for those patients, what we were able to find out is that not only was there recovery in that part of the brain, but it appears that there were new pathways which were generated. Now, what are these pathways? These pathways means that if this is the motor cortex area, the other parts of the brain are apparently trying to help that person. Okay, so this is something very interesting, which is called creation of new beta band cortical networks, okay, or pathways. That even if one part of the brain is dead, the other part of the brain, the neurons tend to try and help. And in trying to help, they are creating this kind of pathways. So the recovery is because of pathways. The recovery is because of regeneration. The recovery is because of reorganization. All three are taking place simultaneously. How much of what happened, we don't know. Till now, it's not known. Okay, but what is clear is that it does happen. We extended this to wheelchairs. Okay, so you can mount a exoskeleton on a wheelchair. Okay, and simply by looking at this on this computer screen with these arrows, which basically indicate go forward, left, right, center, and in the center is for the catching actuation of the exoskeleton. So the same exoskeleton was used also on a wheelchair for maybe catching for impaired patients. Okay, this is just an extension of that. So this is basically about hand exoskeletons, and unfortunately, I will not be able to go into leg exoskeletons, but I'll just very briefly give you some idea that in leg exoskeletons also, okay, we try to follow similar kind of principles. That is, you look at the joints, okay, and human joints are are having this instantaneous center of rotation problem. So for walking leg exoskeleton, if you're trying to replicate the walking motion, again, you cannot put revolute joints. And if you look at some of the exoskeleton like Bleeks and Hell, they all have 4-bar mechanism somewhere. Okay, so we essentially looked at the motion of the joints, the ankle, hip, and the knee joints, and then we designed 4-bar mechanisms, the same procedure, exactly same what we did for the hand, for the legs, okay, and for the one for the hip joint, one for the knee joint, and then we did gravity balancing, basically because the leg exoskeletons are very heavy. Okay, so for that, what we did is what we did finally make is something like this. Okay, so this is a lab model, of course, which doesn't look very nice like the commercial ones there. Okay, but the basic difference, the basic issue is that these are also made of 4-bar mechanisms only, and we are trying to look at the BCI integration with them. We have not been able to do that so far because grasping is very easy to figure out, but in walking you also have to think about stuff like balance, okay, which you can't get from BCI. Okay, so this is a little bit more difficult project than simply looking at hand exoskeletons. So in terms of challenges, okay, this is I just thought that this is one of the best exoskeletons as of now. It is called Huma. It's made by Hyundai Motors. But if you look at the structure, you'll see there are 4 bars there. Okay, so if you look at this is a better more clear. So to take care of your varying instantaneous center of rotation, there is one 4 bar there, and there is another 4 bar there, so double 4 bar. Okay, this can take care of your varying instantaneous center of rotation. And they also used impedance controllers. So this is what the exoskeleton looks like. This is one of the best designs I've seen so far. And they have also used impedance control, variable impedance control, almost similar to what we have done, where they change the stiffness, play with the stiffness. Now, in terms of challenges in design, okay. So I basically gave an idea about some of the challenges and some of the ways in which people are trying to handle these challenges. Now, design based on human biomechanics is number one. I think we have still not solved this problem. Okay. 4-bar mechanism is, it works for a limited joint angle, but in 3D motion, it doesn't work. Okay. So design, there's a big challenge in terms of design. Number two, sensor development for human machine interface. What are the various sensory information required? Okay, is it force, torque, motion? And remember, this has to be done in 3D. Okay, what kind of sensors are there? As of today, there are no sensors which can measure forces in 3D in the fingertip. All the robot sensors are all 1D. They measure contact or they measure pressure, not 3-dimensional forces. Okay, so whereas the human fingertip can measure all kinds of forces in all directions. Okay, so this is a very big challenge. In fact, last 30 to 30 years, I would say there is very little development here. Okay, people have almost given up by saying that nothing more can be done. Control for human-like motion. Okay, how when there is a robot and a human together, okay, and they are tightly coupled, okay, how can you ensure that they are safe? Okay, this is a challenge because when a human is walking, for example, the person can suddenly change his gait. Okay, then how will the system figure out that the gait has changed? Okay, so that is something that is a major challenge. Human assist, how much are you going to assist? Okay, how do you know that? That is again something which is not very clear. Now, most of the leg exoskeletons which are going on, it is basically for fully paralytic patients, the patient who cannot have any, or a patient who does not have any kind of motion. Okay, in that case, it's easy because the robot is the leader. The person just is moving around. That's it. But if it's the other way around, that the device is assisting the human, then what is the level of assistance? Okay, how do you figure that out? And finally, how do you evaluate such systems? Okay, so is it useful? Is it not useful? Okay, how do you know that? We say that exoskeleton is helping the person to carry load, or is it the other way around? The person was actually carrying the exoskeleton. Okay, was the energy saving on either side? Okay, how do you know? So these are some aspects which are still very, very open. So this is an area I think which is very open, and there is a lot of research going on. But what I would I would like to encourage the younger researchers basically to look at the physics involved. Okay, it is not only a question of taking out some data, putting some machine learning algorithm and getting some results. Okay, you have to understand the physics which is involved here. Okay, physics of interaction, physics of motion. Okay, and unless we can solve that, I don't think we can solve this problem at all. And please look at the physics of interaction, physics of walking, physics of grasping, physics of sensory interactions, physics of control. Okay, and then understand how the system is actually functioning, and then try and approach the problem and solve it. Okay, so that is how we might be able to get better solutions and better devices. So I think I've run out of time today, so I will stop here. Thank you. So if there are any questions, I will be happy to answer.
Yeah. So thanks, Professor Dutta, for such an informative presentation. So yeah, it covered a really broad range of topics from design to control and has given a great insight on developing exoskeletons. So yeah, we do have a couple of questions from audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So first one is like in the hand exoskeleton that you have shown, finger exoskeleton. So to what extent the assistance is provided by the finger exoskeleton? Like, is it like a predefined trajectory that we just have to follow, or we are also controlling the level of the assistance?
We are controlling it is assist as required. Okay. So if the person doesn't require any assistance, then the person should be allowed to do the task by himself. No assistance is given. And
Okay.
when the person is, when it is assisting, okay, it should assist, but at the same time, the person should not become lazy that the person is doing nothing and the exoskeleton is doing everything. So there is that challenge level which is getting augmented. So it should make the task harder and harder for the person, even when assisting. And all this is done simply by switching those MK values.
So another question we have is like, will non-invasive methods be enough for knowing whether there was regeneration of cells?
MEG gives detailed information of the inside. It can see right inside. So that is non-invasive. Okay, but it's very expensive.
And we have another in general question. So where do you think that BCI based control systems prevail in future? Like invasive versus non-invasive, which one would be the best one to see? And some thoughts on how to filter the data from non-invasive signals.
Yeah, so invasive, I think, is out of question. I mean, I don't think you'd like to have electrodes in your brains. Okay, there is ethical issues and all kinds of things. Okay, so invasive is out of question. Now, non-invasive is basically surface electrodes. And the problem with the surface electrode is that the neurons are situated right inside the brain. So by the time the signal comes there, there is a lot of other noise going inside. Okay, a lot of noise comes. So you get data which is very noisy, plus the signal level is very, very small. It's microvolts. Okay, so if you're trying to catch microvolt signals, it is extremely, extremely difficult. Okay, but if you know which frequency to catch, that also is difficult because there is a lot of overlap. Okay, so till now BCI, whatever people have done is essentially what we call gross motion. What I mean by that is, if I say move your right hand, and the person thinks, we can make out, okay, why? Because the brain is crossed, so I know that from the left side the signal is coming, so is the right hand. Okay, but if I say at what velocity the person is moving, you tell me, you can't do that. Okay, that's not possible till today. Okay, why? Because as soon as the signal desynchronizes, it will again resynchronize. Okay, this is not like it's a continuous signal, it's continuously changing. Okay, and there is a lot of signals which are together, so there is a lot of background noise. Okay, so if you look at the signal quality that is shown here, this is what the signal looks like. Okay, and the neurons are all firing simultaneously, okay, even when you're sleeping. Okay, so it's not like at particular instant this is behaving like this. Now the other difficulty with this is that depending on so many other parameters, like if the person is tired, if the person is sleepy, this signal pattern will start changing. So it is not like today I got a 13 hertz signal from your brain at this instant. If I take it after half an hour, I'll get the same one. It's not like that. So you have to retrain your classifier as it is going. Okay, this makes it very, very difficult. So BCI technology as of today is only for gross motion. Whatever is available in the market is for gross, for playing video game like left, right. That's okay because you can see. So I think it's also a very good thing, because you can do maybe hundreds of years of research more, try to figure this out. And I think it's also very good, because if you really understand all the signals in the brain, then I can figure out what you're thinking, which is not a very good thing. So in future, there'll be no exams. They'll put an electrode and they'll know whether you know or you don't know. Maybe another 500 years.
So another question is, so I mean, there is another research direction that is budding is, so they are using, researchers are using force sensors at the where the exoskeleton is mounted on the body. So they are measuring the reaction force, interaction force between human and the exoskeleton, and they're developing controls to minimize that interaction force. I mean, in a way, that's like detecting intention of the human. So the same way what I mean EMG or EEG signals does. So how you foresee that
Yes.
modality?
So for here, we also put pressure sensors basically. So they are pressure sensors which are detecting the pressure actually, although we are seeing force. It's basically detecting contact and then pressure. Okay. Now, all this is fun as long as you are in 1D. Okay. The moment you come to 3D, then the fun will start, because you cannot get three-dimensional force motion data. Okay. At the moment, what they are doing, for example, in the leg exoskeleton or hand, they put a pressure sensor or touch sensor. If contact has been made, you say, okay, the person wants to move that side. Okay. But this is still in 1D only. Okay. Not in 3 dimensions. So if I catch an object and I start moving it like this, okay, which human being can do very nicely. No robot can do this. Okay, why? Essentially, the robot doesn't have those sensors. So how can it do it? Okay, we are doing it in force control mode. So this is something I said. Now, all those of you who are listening, please try to think about this very carefully. That if you have a pen, I can do like this. Okay, is this position control mode or is this force control mode? Okay. What mode am I working in? Okay, so this is actually force control mode. You can't do this position control mode. Why? Because even a small error somewhere will destabilize your system. That is what I said by a human is force controlled, whereas a robot is position controlled. And we are force controlled because we have all these sensors in the fingertip, which can measure three-dimensional force, torque, pressure, everything we get. The poor robot doesn't have this. So, but there has been no development in force sensor development. I think people have given up. And when people talk of haptics, it is basically they take some signal and then they do signal processing, learning, machine learning, this, that. But ultimately, it's not the sensor. Okay, so I think that is where the challenge is. And that's where we are stuck also.
So Sanjeev, I just intervene. So I mean, this was amazing talk, Professor Dutta. I mean, the way you presented from, I think, motivating the problem, coming to the mechanism and the design part, and then coming to the actually using of BCI and the control strategy. I mean, we have so many students among our audience. I believe, I think they must have learned a lot, and they must have a lot of questions. Um, a small questions I would have is uh, the way I think the EMG EEG coupling is happening, as well as the force control at the or the force sensing at the fingertip is happening.
Mhm.
And then the modeling of the stiffness, where you are using this M and C. I mean, your results make it so easy for us to understand, okay, this is what is actually happening. But just from the benefit of student, I just want to take your opinion that how much time it took you to, go through all this. And I think is it like something which you can adapt very quickly between subjects, or does it requires like a calibration or some kind of tuning whenever it has to be used with a subject before?
Yes, number one is the BCI has to be calibrated every day before the person uses it. And it has to be recalibrated using the shift detector, because there is a change in the BCI signals when the person is doing it. But that is automatically taken care of via, we have used a support vector machine. That's automated.
I
Okay, that's one part. The second part is the M and K values. They are specific to a person only. So what we do is we start with a low value, see what the person's values are, and then try and go into assist mode or start updating. So we have to keep track of this. Okay. And that is an indicator of recovery also, that if you are seeing that you have to keep increasing your MNK, the person is able to do, that means the person is recovering also. Okay, so both of them are in a way you have to keep updating, or they are both adaptive, I should say. You have to keep adapting both of them, the BCI part, of course, and also that MK parameters.
I see, I see. Wonderful. So, I mean, like there are a number of questions coming in. I mean, if you have time, we
Yeah,
can
okay,
a
I have
few
time.
more.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, please, Sanjeev, please continue.
Yeah. So the current, I mean, we have one more question from the participant. So that the current design of exoskeleton can accommodate all the fingers, and also how do you explain proprioception in humans? Like, are humans sensing partial position information?
Yeah, so the first question what was the
So
first question?
does the current design can accommodate all the fingers?
Yes, we actually started off with 3 fingers, 9 degrees of freedom, and because it was stroke only for stroke, we found that stroke patients do not need 9 degrees of freedom. They need much lesser. They can hardly move their fingers, and that's the reason we brought it down to 4. But the same design can be followed for 5 fingers also. Okay, but if you require. So there is some thought on if stroke patients want to paint, for example, or they want to write, can you use the same one? Okay, so we have looked at that direction also. I did not cover it today, that you can actually write with this. Okay, you can draw straight lines, you can draw curves. The second is that the human fingertip, okay, has I think 7 kinds of sensors. Okay, there is force is there, then slip is there, pressure is there, then vibration is there. Okay, then in terms of force, we can measure normal force, we can measure shear force. Okay, and I actually started working for my master's in 1990. That is more than how many years ago? 30 years ago. Okay, on it got me interested in, because I was working in BRC in telemanipulation. In telemanipulation, this is very, very important. How is the sensory information going through? Okay, that is where I started off working, and we looked at something very interesting, and something so very. I'll just draw it here. Okay, here if I draw. So in this case, you can see that there is a normal force like this. Okay, and there is a force in this direction, which is the shear force. So this is Fn, and this is Fs. Okay, so the robot finger can measure Fn. It cannot measure Fs. You cannot measure shear force. It's not possible. Whereas the human fingertip can. If you look if you look at the actual cross section of the human fingertip, so the human fingertip is something like this: the top layer, second layer, the third layer has layers like this. So the sensors are placed in such a way. There are different sensors, and they are placed in such a way inside the finger that all kinds of sensory information can be detected from those fellows. How it is done is not very clear. Maybe change of strain energy. But there are 7 kinds of sensors actually which are there in the fingertip, which can measure normal force, shear force, then vibration, slip. Okay, very interesting is, suppose on a table, okay, if I keep an object like this and I ask you to lift it, you will catch it, and how much force are you going to apply? You'll try and lift it a little bit, which means you're measuring the shear force, which is Fs again. You're measuring that force, and then you'll keep increasing the force until it's enough, and then you lift it. That's how human beings lift. Now this poor robot cannot measure that force Fs. So there is no way the robot can lift that object, right? So this is physics. I talked about physics. This has nothing to do with robotics or anything. This is physics. So unless I can measure it, there is nothing I can do about it. And there is no sensor which can do that. Very recently, I saw some work from Professor Alison Okamura in Stanford. She has developed 2D sensors. We had developed 1D. In 1990, when I worked, I had developed 1D. Okay, that is strain gauge based. It can detect slip and vibrations. She has detected 2D, but we are still not in 3D. So this also talks about the beauty of the human system, that we can sense all this information in 3D. The robot has no way of knowing that. So unless you know, then how is it possible to integrate both these systems? So there are challenges at every level.
So we have another question. So admittance and impedance are like two sides of the same coin. While providing assistance, admittance is used to allow for motion. Do you think while looking at impedance, that is force resistance, and controlling it, can we force patients to think and engage in the task?
In a way, no, because because the thinking is actually happening in the brain, whereas the sensing is happening in your fingertip. And the stroke patients normally will not be getting the sensory information. Okay, how much force they are applying, they won't know. Okay, but if they are actually correctly thinking, that will happen in the brain. Okay. So it's actually a closed loop which takes place. So so this figure that I had shown right at the beginning is actually a closed loop control system there. Yeah, this one. So one part is your sensory information, which is here, and the thinking is actually taking place in the brain. And you have visual feedback, which is going from this side. So it is actually a closed loop control system. And that is what is causing the recovery. So our next hypothesis is, even if you don't use a VCI, which is very expensive, if you can make the fellow force the person to think, okay, it should still help. But how? That is our guru Ramdev says that you meditate. So if you are actually meditating and doing your task, it could be giving you a better result. Okay, because it is giving you that closed loop control system. So that is I think that is the direction in which we should be going.
Sanjeev, do we have more questions or?
Yeah, we are done.
Okay, then we are done for the day.
Yeah,
okay,
I mean,
thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Datta. This was amazing. I mean, I think some students might have more questions, and so the audience, if you have more questions, please shoot emails to us, and I think if need be, we can reroute them to Professor Datta as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It was very nice.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Bye
Yeah,
bye.
bye. So if you need do you need the PPT, then just send me a mail, or how should I send it to you?
So yeah, I think I can send you the email, and then
Yeah,
you
so
can
if you have a Gmail ID, just send it to me.
Sure. So actually, my IIT Gandhinagar ID works with Gmail.
Okay, so it will take a 20 MB file, right?
Yes. On Google Drive, you can share it with me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
Very
thanks.
much.
Yeah, bye.
Okay. Bye, everybody, and thank you for attending. In future, we will be again coming with a couple more webinars, and keep a lookout on our website, and we will be shooting some emails to you all. All right. Goodbye.